ACC leftovers. Who's worth what and why? Voice of College Football here. Thanks for stopping by. We appreciate you checking us out. Please hit the like button and subscribe. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. We sized up the top half of the ACC and their candidacy, their qualifications, their total resume for entry into a Big Two conference, the SEC or the Big Ten, or many of them will just want to stay in the game and latch on to the Big 12. And we will see if the SEC and the Big Ten break away for their own playoff or if the Big 12 is included with some semblance of the ACC. We'll start with a pretty good football program that has established itself from coming up from the group of five. We didn't call it the group of five at the time, but they were in independent status, as was Penn State, South Carolina, Miami, Syracuse, Boston College, so many schools throughout the East. If you're an old-timer like me, you remember having independent status, and Louisville was one of those teams that Howard Schnellenberger in the 1980s got hold of, and they ended up winning a Fiesta Bowl and finishing 11-1 under Schnellenberger's direction, blasting Alabama in 1990. So they had that independent status all the way up until 1995. Then they went to Conference USA and became a major force there through 2004. And then morphed into the Big East, where they definitely were a factor through 2012. Went to the American Conference for one season as the Big East broke up at that point. And that one season in the American Conference under Charlie Strong, all they did was just go 12-1 and beat Florida in the Sugar Bowl. And now they're in the ACC, and it's been an up-and-down ride. They certainly have been generally in that 8-5 range, 109-71 over these seasons going back to 2010. They've had 9 top 25 finishes since 2001. So that's pretty strong considering they've only been playing in the Power 5 for the past 10 years. They went to an ACC championship game under Jeff Brom. Apparently, coming back from the Bobby Petrino stay and Scott Satterfield, they have definitely upgraded on the sidelines with Jeff Brom, and big things could be ahead. And he definitely took the reins that first season and led them to a place that they haven't seen for quite some time. They went to a 2006 Orange Bowl. We mentioned the Sugar Bowl in 2013. The last time they finished in the top 10 was after winning that Orange Bowl game against Wake Forest. Definitely a program that's produced NFL players, that competes, goes to bowl games, goes to decent bowl games, and wins their 7 or 8 games most seasons. Are people watching Louisville football? Yes, they are. And this has been a metric that people have looked at recently with the potential demise of the ACC, the challenge by Florida State to break the grant of rights, to see what have those TV ratings look like in recent years. We apologize that we cannot deliver the ACC network ratings. You see the explanation by Sports Media right there where we take our ratings. But in the network games placed on the ESPN networks, ABC, Louisville, 28.6 million views the past 3 football seasons, and that's going to stack up rather well. They're drawing from the 48th largest market in the country that's pretty much holding steady. Maybe it's dropped a few places here in the last couple decades, but holding steady in that range. I know Lexington is the home of the University of Kentucky, but still, there's got to be some Louisville transplants, some people that have congregated across the state depending on work opportunities. And Louisville is close to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati, to a certain extent, has had Big East American Conference ties with the Bearcats, who has been a conference member and rival of Louisville in the past, and that's a top 40 market as well. In terms of academic ranking, this is going to be the lowest one we're going to see by far, number 195. We saw lower rankings than this when we explored some candidates to help the Pac-12 survive when it was imploding out west. But with 16,000 enrollment, Louisville, we don't know what the emphasis is here going forward in regards to upgrading that standing. Again, that is based on U.S. News and World Report with an endowment of less than $1 billion. We had taken our shots at Dave Doran here at the Voice of College Football, and rightfully so. While he was piecing together 7 and 8 win seasons at North Carolina State. If you really looked at his tenure starting in 2013, going through to about 3 to 4 seasons ago, he was basically beating up on bad non-conference teams, beating up on the bad ACC teams, losing all the games against ranked opponents, basically everything, and piecing together a situation where he could go 3-5, 4-4 in the ACC. He was winning 38% of his games and still getting to bowl play and still keeping his job. Now, he has improved this program now here in the past 3 seasons considerably. So NC State, a viable football program that's playing much better under Dave Doran the past 3 football seasons. When you add it all up over the past 13 seasons, back to 2010, 105 and 73, very similar to Louisville. As I mentioned, better in recent years, 3 top 25 finishes since 2017, 1 in the previous 14 years. The last time NC State won the ACC was back in 1979, and NC State has never gone to a conference championship game. Georgia Tech has gone to multiple title games. So has Boston College. Duke is gone. And, of course, they've been stuck behind Clemson and Florida State in the Atlantic Division. NC State is located smack dab in the middle of Raleigh-Durham, the 22nd ranked market in television. And then if you look at the scope of the markets across North Carolina, you see a glut of top 40 markets. People have moved to North Carolina in the past 3 or 4 decades. The population surge has been substantial. It has caused a market like Charlotte to become a professional sports town. And so they're in a thriving area of the country. And again, Raleigh-Durham at number 22, but also a number of TV markets within 1 to 3 hours away that are in the top 40. NC State drew 22.2 million eyeballs to the TV sets, playing the likes of Clemson and Florida State, of course, over the past 3 football seasons. The academic status, number 60 in the nation, 26,000 plus enrollment, $2.2 billion of an endowment, and that fares pretty well. When you look at colleges that have produced NFL players throughout history, Pitt is mighty impressive. Hugh Green, Tony Dorsett, Dan Marino, and the list goes on and on and on and on. They have not only produced their fair share of NFL players, but I'm talking about all-time greats, Mike Ditka and others. Curtis Martin is on that list, and we could go, yes, on and on with this one. Pitt football all-time with 9 national championships. The last one in 1976 with Tony Dorsett. In the early 1980s, they were a national power under Jackie Sherrill. And again, just producing NFL players all over the place. But basically, they then went into mediocrity. And they've pretty much not been able to escape it. The last time they went to a major bowl, before 2021, they played Michigan State in the Peach Bowl under Pat Narduzzi. And Narduzzi, despite this last season that was a disaster at 3-9, was doing a heck of a job. He had posted the best record in the Coastal Division, albeit the worst division possibly in college football, but still 4 top 25 finishes before Pat Narduzzi going back to 1983. And then he got them to a place where they were winning 8 or 9 ball games, won the ACC championship in 2021. That is something a lot of schools, including Miami, have not done. So Pitt has been a good 7-5, 8-4 kind of team for the most part since 2010 at 98 and 77. The Pittsburgh Steelers are one of the most proud franchises in the NFL and one of the most popular, and their fan base is loyal. Are they watching Pitt football on Saturday? Can't really say that they are one way or the other. I'm sure some of them are. However, Pitt always has to play under the shadow of not just playing in the same town with that brand, but also playing in the same stadium. Still, 22 million people watched Pitt football that was strong in 2021, going to an ACC championship game and winning. So that figure that you see was certainly helped by that run to the ACC championship game, although these are just regular season viewership numbers. So no conference championship games, no bowl games here. However, that 3-9 this past season relegated Pitt to the ACC network. Those numbers are not reflected. 28th rated TV market in the country is pretty much holding steady in recent years, although 30 years ago, Pittsburgh was a top 17 or 18 market in the country, so population is leaving Pennsylvania to a certain extent. This is the 67th ranked university publicly in all the United States, tied with Miami, tied with Syracuse with 20,000 enrollment. The endowment is extremely impressive. This is the 8th best figure for a public university in all America, $5.5 billion in endowment. Doug Flutie, Matt Ryan, where are you? We're talking Boston College football, now looking at the Eagles' chance to play relevant football among the elites going forward. Bill O'Brien takes the reins from Jeff Hafley, who's moved on to the NFL. Did a pretty subpar job, although he did bring the Eagles back from 3-9 in 2022 to a 7-6 finish in a bowl victory against SMU. Bill O'Brien, this is an excellent hire for Boston College football and good timing on their behalf to try to keep them relevant and viable for a spot at the table. Boston College since 2010, 79 wins, 95 losses. That somewhat surprised me. I thought that they would be a little bit closer to 500, but they've had some really down seasons. They have not finished in the top 25 since 2010. When they went number 10 in 2007, of course, they had the Flutie years, 1984 Heisman Trophy, and a top 10 finish that season. In 2004, of course, they joined the Big East, and they have gone to 2 conference championship games since. Boston College plays in a top 10 market in America, but does it matter? This is an obsessive sports town, pro sports town, I will underline. Patriots are popular, and we know what they've done the past 2 decades. And that being said, the Patriots probably aren't as popular as the Red Sox, the Celtics, and the Bruins. All those teams are beloved. And Boston College just kind of plays on the outskirts and doesn't really draw from that TV market. Still, 11 plus million people watch Boston College games over the past 3 seasons. Some teams that have been pretty darn bad. The 2 previous seasons in 2023, they bounced back again at 7-6. Boston College is definitely an excellent school, 39th rated in the country academically with under 10,000 students and a strong endowment of $3.3 billion. Syracuse football history is no joke, but much like Pitt, it seems to have that look of a foregone generation. Syracuse football has not been strong nationally for a long time, going to its last major bowl game under Donovan McNabb in 1998. Ernie Davis and the Orange won a national championship in 1959, and of course that was just years after Jim Brown went to the NFL. Syracuse, 77 wins, 96 losses most recently since 2010, with only one top 25 finish since 2001, and that was a smoke and mirrors work by Dino Babers with a soft schedule in 2018, and again, their last major bowl appearance in 1998. It appears as though Syracuse's ceiling has pretty much been 7-5. People are watching Syracuse football, though. Almost 21 million network views over the past 3 years. Now, they do play Clemson and Florida State, but if you look at their TV numbers facing Clemson and Florida State in particular in their same division, all those divisions no longer exist, Syracuse drew more viewers in those matchups against those top 2 teams of the ACC than other teams that you would liken to them, Wake Forest, Boston College, and others. Despite not really drawing from heavy TV markets, Buffalo is dropping like a rock. I remember when Buffalo was a top 40 market. It's number 54 right now. Syracuse at number 87. I remember when Syracuse was a top 75 market 20 to 30 years ago. Academically, Syracuse is a strong school. They stand at number 67, according to U.S. News & World Report, at 15,000 students with a solid endowment of $1.85 billion. Duke has no football history. None. They might as well not have any football history. They would probably rather have no football history than have the football history than they have. They went to a major bowl game in 1960 and did nothing pretty much until 2024. Okay, Steve Spurrier, did a great job leading them to an ACC championship in 1989. And then, of course, David Cutcliffe, the first half of his tenure, pretty much Duke football. Then he got them to a place where they reached a conference championship game in 2013, played in some decent bowl games, were getting that 7-5, 8-4 kind of run under David Cutcliffe. Then they capsized again, and onto campus stepped Mike Elko, and he did a remarkable job the past 2 seasons. Consider this. Duke football in the ACC was on a 1-16 run. They were deplorable, horrible, getting blasted every week. Mike Elko not only lifted them to 9-4 and 8-5 status the past 2 years, but competing against the best teams in the ACC down to the wire. Beat Clemson last year. Took Florida State to a 4-quarter game. Mike Elko's gone. Manny Diaz, you've got your second shot at the Power 5 back in the ACC with Duke. How good is Duke going to be in football? We will check that out a little bit later. But for now, it's the history, and the history is really bad. There was a stretch between 1999 and 2007 where Duke went 13-90. Now, I could have stretched that span of time out, and the record would have barely gotten better. They were atrocious forever. 85-91 since 2010 is not horrendous, but it's not good. They have one single top 25 finish since 1960. Wake's better than that. That was in 2013, and we mentioned the ACC championship game, which was just a miracle. And then they played in a horrible division in the Coastal. And talk about miracles, of course, the ACC championship with Steve Spurrier in 1989 shows what a great coach he is. Are people watching Duke football? Well, 17.7 million. They did have some nice numbers this past year, and it had some really advantageous positions in terms of network and time of day, taking on Florida State in primetime on ABC. They had a matchup against Clemson on Labor Day weekend where they were the exclusive game. So that was propped up to a certain extent by that, more so than what we talked about with Syracuse. 18 million people basically watched Duke football over the last 3 years on the networks. Raleigh-Durham's a strong market. Charlotte's a strong market 3 hours away, but I don't know that any of those people are watching Duke football, but certainly tune into Duke basketball a couple months later. Academically, this is one of the premier schools in all the nation. Number 7 ranked, 17,000 enrollment, and the endowment is ridiculous at $11.6 billion. After a 4-8 2023, Dave Clawson said, "It is what it is. We're a 4-8 football team, 4-8 football program. I'm a 4-8 football coach." Well, Dave Clawson, you're not. You are doing just about as well as you possibly can at Wake Forest, because this is one of the most difficult places to win in all of college football. 81-92 is the record since 2010. It's almost exactly what Duke is. And Dave Clawson is 5-2 in bowl games. He's basically lifted this program to the place where before last year, they were going 7-5, 8-4 every year. Went to the ACC championship game in the same division as Clemson and Florida State and NC State and others 2 years ago. 3 top 25 finishes since 1948. Clawson is one of those. And again, a lot of finishes very close to the top 25. Nobody watches Wake Forest football. Less than 13 million. Now, they do get relegated to the ACC network on a large basis, and they draw from a fairly decent TV market, Winston-Salem at number 46. But again, all of North Carolina saturated by fairly large TV markets in that mid-size range. The academics are strong. It's a small school at 5,500. That plays to their disadvantage in regards to the gate. And that basically plays to their disadvantage. Students don't come to the games because there are not any students. You could only fill up one section with 5,500 if they all show up, and probably most of them are at the library if we were speaking 1985 terms. They're back in their dorms studying. So whether they go to the ball games or not, we really don't know, because even if they show up, they only can fill one section of the stadium, and this produces less alumni. It's a good school. Dave Clawson's doing a heck of a job, and the endowment is fairly strong. Do we all remember how good Stanford was a decade ago? They were vying with Oregon for Pac-12 supremacy and position in the college football playoff, going to BCS bowl games on a regular basis from 2010 through 15. For about 6-7 years, Jim Harbaugh built it. David Shaw maintained it for a while. But Stanford football has been awful in recent years, and they have suffered these lapses throughout their history. Still, if you look at everything put together since 2010, despite going 9-27 the last 3 years, it looks impressive at 111-64. They lived in the top 5 to 10 in the country from 2010 to 2015. They went to multiple Rose Bowls. They went to a Fiesta Bowl. They were just exceptionally good. They also went to a Orange Bowl during that time. In the past, they usually are not a good football team. However, they have had those spurts under John Ralston and Bill Walsh in the 70s. They won back-to-back Rose Bowls under Ralston against Ohio State and Michigan, 2 teams vying for national championships. People are watching Stanford football. Well, I think that this does, to a certain extent, shine a light on Stanford. It does play into their brand power, although most of it is Notre Dame generated, USC generated, and the other stronger programs in the Pac-12. Now they come to the ACC, and we'll see what these viewership numbers do for Stanford. And of course, I'm sure that they drew many more viewers playing on ABC constantly 10 years ago than they did over the past 3 years playing in basically no man's land. And the TV market, much like BC and Boston College, is not really relevant. San Francisco, San Jose, they've not been able to take advantage of that. Do we really need to address the academics? This is the premier school in the country, public university number 3, 17,000 students. The endowment is number 3 to Harvard and Yale at $36.5 billion. Similar to Pitt, Cal produces NFL players in impressive numbers, and the quality of players has been crazy good. Nowhere over the past several decades has Cal been anywhere close to a top 25 team on a consistent basis. Yeah, you can look at those years, 2004, Aaron Rodgers. Yes, they won the Pac-12 championship. But I'm talking about stretching that out to 2, 3, 4 years minimum. No, have not been anywhere close to a good football program since the days of Joe Kapp going to the Rose Bowl in 1959. But producing NFL players, while they can't produce a top 25 team, they have produced top 10 levels of NFL players. It's pretty impressive, or it's pretty deplorable when you consider they can't take advantage of it when they're in college. Yes, the Rose Bowl in 59, that's the last time they were in a major bowl game. Aside from popping up a couple times, like the example I gave in 2004, Cal football at its best for 70 years, 7-5, not even 8-4. Justin Wilcox has been there now for almost a decade, and his Pac-12 record is deplorable. They're 70-95 since 2010. They've been an NFL factory, and even in their downtimes, look at the last several seasons producing NFL players, but they don't produce at the collegiate level. They're getting some draw on TV, of course. This all depends on the opponents in the Pac-12. But despite having 3 awful seasons, the last 3 seasons, I know 6-7 with a bowl appearance this past year wasn't that bad, but 18 million is a pretty high number. Again, those are going to be the Oregon games this past season against Again, those are going to be the Oregon and USC games in particular, but they've played some decent non-conference opponents and drawn some crowds. And of course, the academics are legendary and exemplary with an endowment of almost $3 billion. We love to talk about wild cards, and in this assessment, this is the wild card of the draw. They are located in the Dallas Metroplex. SMU, 90 and 85 since 2010. That's basically been split into 2 different tenures. They were awful for the first half of that. Then Chad Morris lifted them. Sonny Dykes took it over. They did well, doing well right now under Rhett Lashley, who led them to the American Conference Championship. So they win the conference championship, flee to the ACC, and this past season they finished in the top 25 for the first time since, those Pony Express days of Craig James and Erica Dickerson, 1984. Now, 84, they were both gone, but you get my point. They were there in 82 when they went to the Cotton Bowl, beat Dan Marino, had a run in the early 80s of going 41-5 with 4 top 10 finishes. That has been the zenith of SMU football, unless you want to go back to the 40s and 50s during some spots. But SMU obviously cheated more blatantly than any school in history, paid the price for it, the death penalty, and they have been scratching and clawing, trying to get back to relevant college football status ever since, and they have finally reached the ACC, and they did everything they could to get there, and we'll address that in just a second. Nobody's watching these football games. I was going through the numbers for SMU, and actually it's an unfair comparison because actually SMU has been on major, I'll call them major networks, basically ESPN2, ESPNU, those type of appearances, more regularly than everybody else on this list. But they've got the lowest TV numbers. So when a Cal, Stanford, NC State, Louisville, we could go through all these schools, and sure, there's a variation in regards to TV numbers, but they basically show up, and unless they're playing Clemson or Florida State in primetime, they're going to draw 1 to 1.5 million people if they're just playing a decent opponent. Well, SMU is drawing 15 to 30,000 people a number of times. This wasn't like one random week. This is multiple weeks each season. So while everybody else that we're looking at and their television numbers include about 6 or 7 out of their 12 games, this includes almost every SMU game. So it's even more egregious than 5.8 million compared to the rest that are in the generally 15 to 22 million range over these 3 football seasons. So the Dallas market being number 5 has no impact on this because they are obviously not watching SMU football. The academics are okay. The endowment is strong at $2 billion. Let's take the data, include my perspective, and put it into some context. Football right now, right this second, looking at 2023, projecting toward 2024, these are the best football programs. Louisville's number 1. NC State's right there. Very close. Pitt, got to be concerned coming off 3-9. Now consider, of course, Duke strong under Mike Elko. So that 4th position a bit tenuous. They lose their head coach. Is Manny Diaz going to perform at the Mike Elko rate? He did bring in a very talented quarterback in Malik Murphy. Boston College and Bill O'Brien, if he can't win there, they're never going to get a coach that's going to be able to lift them to 8-4 kind of status. Wake under Dave Clawson has been as strong as they possibly can be. Cal is an interesting situation with Justin Wilcox, who can't do anything to get himself fired. I would say that from 5 to 9, you could throw them in a barrel and pick them out one by one, and they could come out in any order between Boston College at 5 and Syracuse at 9. Of course, Fran Brown taking over for Dino Babers. And Stanford's the worst football team right now, coming off 3 consecutive 3-9 finishes. Mark, who cares about football history since we're projecting forward? Well, football history gives us an indication, especially when we emphasize recent football history. So I'm taking everything into account, but certainly looking recent history as being an indicator as to what these teams possibly can do. Pitt's got the best football history. They've got the most national championships. They produce NFL players. They've actually surged a little bit under Pat Narduzzi to become more of a top 25 program in recent years after a down spell of general mediocrity. Not horrendous level of play, but mediocrity from the mid-'80s up until about 10 years ago. Stanford is just an interesting case because they can elevate to be excellent. And I don't know if the Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw combination is ever going to take place at Stanford ever again. But they have been good at various times in their history. Syracuse, of course, has an excellent football history. Unfortunately, none of it's in the 21st century. Louisville and NC State, again, are good now. NC State, not much of a history. Pretty much in 7-5 kind of program for the past 40 years. Cal, of course, produces the NFL players, but they never win, but they're never really that horrible. SMU's on the back end of this. Again, they have elevated to elite status during very short runs going way, way back 70, 80 years ago, and then also the 1980s. By far the two that were the easiest to rank here. Wake Forest and Duke have just been two of the worst football programs in the Power of Five over the course of their histories. When we look at the market size and the media influence, we're looking at two different things here. So the market size is simply, where do you play? Oh, you're in New York City, you play in the number one market. Oh, you're Rutgers and you play there? Well, nobody really cares. So there are two things to be considered. The market size shows the potential that those schools have. And of course, it does help even when we've got obvious situations like Rutgers in New York City, Boston College in Boston, where there's very little influence, but it still does exist there, and there's still an opportunity to take advantage of it. So we're ranking the market size, but we're also looking at media influence. Louisville draws better nationally than Boston College does. So we are looking at a combination of the market size, but also how popular these teams are, good times and down times alike. So, of course, it's influenced by how good they are. And, of course, with these teams, it's been influenced by who they've played. So we've tried to filter through that as much as we possibly can to find the truth. And if you just flat out look at market size, so if you're just going to flat out look at market size, SMU's in Dallas. They're number one at the fifth highest TV market in the country. Boston College is 2, and on down the list, I rank the TV markets just plain and simple. And really, when you go into those North Carolina markets, they're also pretty much playing to the same market because they play in their individual markets. So NC State has a bit of an advantage along with Duke and Raleigh-Durham, close to top 20 market. But all those markets in North Carolina are playing to about 5 top 40 to 45 markets in the rankings. And if you're curious, the TV markets get ranked all the way down to 210. Hello, Zanesville, Ohio. You're around 203. But now let's look at media influence. Who's watching these teams play? It's been eye-opening to a lot of people with this ACC grant of rights situation in Florida State trying to flee the league and battling in court, that a lot of analysis has been out there concerning television ratings. And Louisville has pretty much right behind Clemson and Florida State, right there with Miami. Louisville has been drawing people. Well, they benefit from drawing some decent non-conference games that they schedule, of course, and also playing in Clemson and Florida State's division. However, other teams like Syracuse, for example, like Boston College, have the same benefits, and more people are watching Louisville football. So I believe that they've got the best draw. It's extremely close. Pitt's there. They're in a major market. They also are close enough to Ohio that if they get into the Big Ten, that could help them considerably. I put NC State at 3, Stanford at 4. Stanford draws viewers, of course. Again, they schedule in such a way and played in the Pac-12 against some premier programs. I get it. Syracuse, again, when you compare the numbers, when they play a decent opponent versus Boston College, NC State, Wake playing that same decent opponent or really good opponent like a Clemson or Florida State, people show up and watch Syracuse football a little bit more than we may give them credit for. Boston College, because of the influence of the market, I put it number 6. And then you go down the list all the way to SMU. If you're in Dallas, if you're in a football state that loves football, and then you're also playing in the shadow of the Dallas Cowboys, and you're also playing in the shadow of the umpteen major schools led by Texas and Texas A&M in the state, that's kind of a difficult place to play. So they're taking an advantage and making it a disadvantage because they get ignored. So when you look at the numbers, they're just completely atrocious for SMU. And we'll address this in just a second. When we look at the recruiting list, you're going to think I lost my mind. But let me show you an example here. Let's go to the Houston Cougars of about 10 years ago, when they built that excellent football program under Tom Herman for a few years. They were the only school in America that drew all of their players from within a 30-mile radius. And they built a football team that was as good as just about anyone in America. No, they were not Alabama or Clemson. But after that, they were legitimately a top 10 or 15 team for a few years because the NFL base in Houston, like Atlanta, was that strong that they could just draw those players from there and they could compete at the highest level and be the best group of 5 team. There's a school on our list that also fills those qualifications. SMU is not recruiting at a high level. That's not what this is about. But the recruiting footprint and the opportunity by going to the ACC and maybe if the ACC implodes, landing somewhere else, Big 12, SMU's got the number 1 recruiting footprint. So understand that. NC State's at number 2. It's difficult to rank after this. NC State, Louisville, Pitt. I threw Stanford in there. Stanford actually is, during their good times, they've actually played the Stanford card to their advantage. It's a disadvantage because it's difficult to get into the school. But if you can get the right football players that obviously have to have the talent to be able to play at that level, but you can say, we're Stanford. Come here. You can get a world-class education in addition to the football. And that's what Stanford and Cal have here. Duke and Wake Forest, I put them a little bit higher than BC and Syracuse because BC and Syracuse are basically, in a sense, maybe I'm overstating it. I definitely am because the wastelands are in the Dakotas and places like that in regards to number of football players. So there are football players at BC and Syracuse or in the Massachusetts and upstate New York areas, but there are just not enough of them of the 3-star ability that can play at the big time level. So there were reasons, believe me, that I went with this order. I really thought it through, and that's where I see both a recruiting opportunity based on the nuances of these universities and football programs, but also based on what players are in their backyards. I love putting together the next list. Realistic potential. What is that? Well, this is the school, the program, putting it all together when they can possibly be at their very best. It may not be likely. It's not likely in most cases, especially with these schools. So we're taking the bottom half of the ACC here. But it's possible. It's been done before, and that's probably the roadmap more than anything else. That it's been done before, and it's been done recently enough for us to say, right coach, right initiative from the administration, the right timing, all of it put together, right conference, right schedules. They could do something special. Best example of that, Stanford. Look at what happened under Jim Harbaugh and David Shaw. Case closed. Number 2, SMU. Why? They're in Dallas. I gave the Houston example. Also, keep in mind, SMU wants it. They want this so badly. That's why they're in the ACC earning nothing, earning no money. They desperately want to be a big-time football player in the state of Texas. So they wouldn't have made that move if they didn't really want it. So they're all in. Really, the next 3 schools I put in the same position. Pitt, Louisville, and NC State have pluses and minuses. Various portions of the country where there is talent, especially for NC State. And all 3 have proven to be capable football programs for the most part over the past couple decades, but not great. So they have not been able to top-end it like Stanford or like SMU did, albeit cheating in the early 80s. Cal, again, NFL players all over the place. How they've been able to do that is kind of interesting, and they're in a abundant football state. If people are going to care and if they're going to figure, okay, Cal's connected to this conference and this conference is still relevant, okay, we'll go play there. And then after that, it just drops off the board because Boston College and Syracuse have shown more capable of outplaying Wake Forest and Duke over decades. Certainly, Wake Forest and Duke, it's going to be so difficult for them to compete in football. They just want to find a place to go to a conference, play basketball, and make football money and just get to a bowl game. And then we look at the academics. Stanford, Duke, and Cal are the top three in some order, and I think Stanford has distinguished itself, so they break away from the rest of the field. Boston College, Wake, NC State, really good schools, especially BC and Wake. And then you've got some considerations there. Pitt, we go with the endowment over Syracuse. SMU's there. And Louisville, again, somebody would have to explain this to me. We'd have to dive deep into the academic rankings. Number 195, they are 100 spots lower than SMU. Mark, that's all well and good, but where are these schools going to be playing football in the future? Well, that's where. Okay, we're working on that. So coming up in a future video, we're going to break down our projection on where all this lands eventually, whether that's 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, where it all eventually lands. Okay. Also, I'm going to produce a video. You may not care about it, but I'm going to produce it anyway, of what college football should look like. It's not going to look like this, but the way it should look. If we were sensible about traditions, if we were sensible about rivalries, if we were sensible about geography, I'm going to break that down as well. I appreciate your contributions. Let's get this thing to 10, 15,000, 20,000, 50,000 views as we did the last one. So we appreciate you stopping by. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think about our rankings here. We put a lot of time into this, a lot of thought. It's not perfect. Can be argued, definitely, but let us know. And join us for our various shows and team channels across our platform here at the Voice of College Football. Each and every day, we are cranking out content. It may not be here on the main channel, although that's the priority, but find your favorite team or the teams that you hate and lock it in right here at the Voice of College Football.